Hi, I'm Maggie. Thank you for stopping by Crafts the Charm today. You are most welcome here. A long time ago, I bought this necklace at a gift shop in a museum, and I thought it was really beautiful. It's made from beads, which are made from rolled paper, like paper from an old magazine or a newspaper. And at the time, I played with paper and made some beads myself, and I made this necklace. I thought it would be fun if we could roll some beads and maybe make a home decor piece. But for our pieces to come out at all similar, we would need to use the same paper. And then I saw these tablecloths at the Dollar Tree, and this is just two examples. They have a number of different patterns, but all very similar in colors. And these are in the coastal section. So I thought that we could take those, cut them up and roll them into beads, and then maybe combine them with these starfish and sand dollars that they also have in the coastal section, and make a lovely piece of coastal decor. Let's go have some fun. These are the tablecloths, and I think this first one may be discontinued. It may have been there from a prior season, but I've seen a lot of this other one in more recent trips to the Dollar Tree, and that's the one I end up using. But I think any coastal tablecloth would work, or tablecloth with those colors. I thought you might like to look at the necklaces up close. This is the one that I purchased, and I've included a link to Project Have Hope, and you can purchase a necklace like this from there, from folks who are escaping violence. This is the necklace that I made a long time ago from magazines. So we're going to make beads like that, but we're going to make them from our tablecloth. And I am going to make 3 different sizes of beads. So here's the process. So first of all, I'm going to cut strips. Now for the smaller beads, I cut 1-inch strips. So that's easy enough, cut 1-inch strips. For the larger beads, and there are 2 different larger beads, I cut 2-inch strips. Now for the smaller beads, once I have my 1-inch strips, I cut them to roughly 12-inch lengths. But because this is an oval tablecloth, I wasn't always able to get the same length, so they varied between 10 inches and 12 inches. And you can, of course, make them exactly the same size if you want. I didn't think it was that important for this project. Once you have your strips, you're going to cut them along the diagonal, so you'll end up with 2 long triangular strips. And then in order to make the beads, I use a bamboo skewer, and you're going to take the wide end and roll it on the bamboo skewer, and then use a little bit of ordinary white glue, and you can either dot the glue along the length of the triangle, or you can do a long bead of glue along the triangle, and then just roll it up. And what I do is I slide it off the skewer because I don't want it to get stuck to the skewer. And then you can slide them back onto a skewer later to varnish them, but I don't end up doing it that way. Now I will say I did this over a couple of days, and when glue got on the skewer, then I wasn't able to put beads on as easily or slide them off as easily. So I would say either clean off your skewer when you're done, or use a fresh skewer, or do it all in one sitting. Now for one set of beads, what I ended up doing was taking the 2-inch strip, folding it in half, and then rolling it. And so I had that length of the longer 2-inch strip. Those were, I think they were about 2 feet long. But they were much thinner, so they started at 1 inch because I folded them in half and rolled them. And so you end up with a much wider bead that way. So the size of your bead just depends on the size of the paper that you cut and then roll. And you can vary that and see what kind of beads you can get and see what size you like. Once my beads had dried, I wasn't able to put them back on the original bamboo skewer because it was gluey, and I probably could have put them on a fresh one, but what I ended up doing instead was stringing them on some thread, and then I taped that thread to an open cardboard box so that I had the beads strung across the cardboard box. And I brought it outside and used some spray varnish on it. Now you could also use Mod Podge. I just thought that the spray varnish would be quicker, and I used a matte varnish. You could use a gloss if you prefer that, but this is what I had done in the past when I made these. I used a spray varnish. A few years ago I put in a walkway, and I'm actually pretty proud of it. I'll show it to you in another video. And the pavers and the sand for the walkway were delivered on pallets. Now I love wood. You could take these pieces of wood and hang them on a wall and I would call it art. I just love wood. So I wanted to preserve the pallet wood, and I did my best to take the pallets apart so that I could reuse the wood. So that's what I have here, is some pieces of pallet wood, and I'm just sanding them down on all 6 sides, and I'm using, I think, a 60 grit sandpaper on this mouse sander to sand them down. And I sand down a bunch of them, and then I actually only pick 2 of them to use later. If you don't have an old pallet because you didn't put in a walkway a few years ago, you might be able to get a pallet, actually. A lot of places get rid of them. Or you could use other old wood if you have old wood, or if you have a friend who has old wood who'd like to get rid of it. Or you could use newer wood and maybe distress it a little bit. And I would say take a look at my wood right here for ideas about how to distress. Now this is what I call taking stock. What do we have? We have our beads in the different sizes. And I also picked up these iridescent beads at the Dollar Tree. And these faux pearl, they are called beads, but they do not have holes in them. And then there are these wonderful sand dollars that are available now, and starfish at the Dollar Tree. I really love those. That's a starfish. I also have some of this white nautical rope, which I haven't seen at the Dollar Tree recently. You can purchase white rope basically anywhere. And then Dollar Tree also has these nets, and I've wanted to use one of these for a long time, but they're very, very big. Like the holes in the net are very big, so I haven't been able to find a project that I thought they were good for, but I think it's going to work for this project. And then, of course, we have our pallet wood, or alternate wood if you didn't have pallet wood. I'm going to say you could probably also use contact paper that looks like wood and put it over cardboard or something else. So the general idea of what I want to do, the story behind it, if you will, is something like a crate or a lobster trap. And you can see that once you put the net on it, it starts to look a little bit more like a lobster trap. And the idea is this is maybe underwater or has been underwater, so it's got some sea creatures sort of adhered to it. That's the story anyway. I think the beads look sort of like shells or barnacles, and so that's my idea with the beads. Now, I don't want to use all of my beautiful pallet wood, so I'm going to use this less beautiful, very old rotten fence post, or it's really a fence picket. And I was looking to purchase pickets that were replacements, and I bought this a few years ago at Home Depot. You can see it's very warped. It is terrible, terrible wood. That's why I never used it. It's the worst, but it was really cheap. So maybe that's something that you could get it. You could find ones that aren't warped maybe and use those. This is my basement. I don't have a workshop, and my basement is very cluttered, and that's where my radial arm saw is right now. But I wanted to show you how I cut the wood. So I measured that, I think it's 20 inches. And I'm just cutting it with my saw with one hand. You can see I've got it clamped down. I really try to be very, very careful when I'm using this saw. I love this saw. And I wanted to show you how I measure, because I'm not good at measuring. So instead of measuring the second one at 20 inches with my tape measure, I put the first one, oop, there's my finger. I put my first one on top and clamp them down together. Make sure that the saw blade is exactly right up next to it, and cut them again. Now, after all this trouble of getting that exact, I actually didn't end up cutting the last piece. The last piece was really close, and I thought it would be more fun to have the pieces slightly different sizes, just to make it feel a little bit more like it was opportunistically created and maybe not necessarily so planned, so maybe made from found wood. And what I decided was that maybe I wanted to paint every other piece of wood. So paint those the replacement pickets that I had purchased that were so terrible, and paint them either white or a blue that would go with the beads. And I did end up deciding on a blue. Here are the 3 poor quality pickets, and this is that Craft Smart blue paint that I love so much that I believe I got at Target. I don't end up using the white paint. I do use the water because I do want this to look like it's faded and weathered, and certainly the wood has gotten us 90% of the way there. So I tried to put just a little bit of water in there, and the first try I felt wasn't watered down enough, and then when I added more water I added too much, so I felt that was watered down a little too much. So then I did paint them with the very watered down paint, but then I went back, got rid of a little bit of the water, added a little bit more paint, and went over it a little bit heavier, but I tried not to paint all of the wood again so that it would keep that weathered look. So now that we have all of our wood, it's time to assemble it together. And it's about an inch deep once I layer the wood on top. So I select the pieces that I want to use, I select the sides that I want to use, and I put them all together. And then I did my best to align the first piece of wood carefully for when I was going to attach it together. And I really wanted to use a combination of wood glue and staples. I thought that that would be the best way to attach this, but I didn't have any staples that were deep enough. They were only about 1/2 inch, my staples, and so they didn't make it through. They really didn't make it through either piece of wood, either the old rotten pickets or the new terrible replacement pickets. I did staple the new terrible replacement pickets down, but then I went back in and I found some 1-inch nails that I had, and I used those to attach everything together. So I think probably ideally it would be either the staples and the glue, or 1-inch wood screws and the glue if you really want this to hold together well. But with the 1-inch nails, mine seems to be holding together pretty well. So now we're on to what I call the fun part. You've got your wood together and you've got all your pretty coastal things from the Dollar Tree or beads that you've made or whatever you've collected. And now we get to put it together and make our coastal art. Now you can see how I chose to put it together. I'll bet you can come up with something that's better than what I put together, and I think that's fantastic. I hope you'll share your creation with me if you do. And if you have suggestions for me, because
I'll be the first to admit I'm not the best at this. Like I said, just a piece of wood would have made me happy. And what I end up with here is just a little bit busy for me. So if you have suggestions for me, I would love to hear them. But I sort of experimented with the different pieces that I had, and what I settled on was using a combination of the beads and the blue iridescent beads on the skewers on the left. So they fit nicely on the skewers, and the skewers I could just stick under the wood, so that was really handy. So I used those on the left and the right, and then I put the starfish and the sand dollars just sort of around, and I was able to affix those with hot glue. I would say with those, they're not flat on the bottom, of course, so you want to make sure you're getting the hot glue on the part that's going to actually touch your wood. And then I wanted to just sort of scatter the pearls around, so almost like sand, almost like a little treasure hunt. I just really liked the pearls, and again, they didn't have holes in them, so I wasn't able to put them on the skewers with the blue iridescent beads and the beads that we made. Then the white plastic bag that the starfish and the sand dollars came in, to me looked very beachy. If you've ever gone beach combing or walked on a beach, you will often find plastic bags like that stuck in the seaweed, and the plastic that's on lobster pots, or the nets that are on lobster pots, they might be plastic. They look sort of like that. So I did end up putting that on the top left with some rope just wrapped around it, and I did drape the Dollar Tree netting across it, and I think that looked pretty good. But again, the whole overall completed project is a little bit busy for me, and I welcome your suggestions. Now with the net, you could cut that and you could staple it, or possibly even glue it. I decided to just tie it on the back, and that way if I ever decide to take this thing apart or simplify it, I can always reuse that net in a different way. Now you could either prop this or hang it, and I thought that I would probably end up hanging it, so I took some florist's wire and I just wrapped it around the nails and the staples on the back to make a hanger. And here it is finished, staged with a few coastal-ish things that I haven't really decorated for summer yet.
I had so much fun making that piece of wall decor. I love to work with wood. I was trying to make something that both had a story but also had some texture to it, and that was nice to look at, and I don't know if I fulfilled that goal. If you have comments for me, if you have suggestions, if you did something differently, I would love to hear about it. Please tell me in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up. And if you like this sort of content, please consider subscribing to Crafts the Charm. Take care.